"He is not trying to escape," the nurse whispered. "He is trying to warn us." Rain pressed against the tall windows of St. Gabriel Medical Center, turning Charleston's midnight lights into pale streaks of gold and gray. Inside the emergency wing, everything moved with practiced urgency. Rubber saws crossed polished tile. Monitors chimed behind closed doors. The air smelled of antiseptic, wet wool, and the faint metallic trace of a storm carried in from the street. Caleb Rowe lay motionless on a rolling stretcher, his face drained of color beneath the harsh ceiling lights. At 38, the former United States Marine still had the broad shoulders and close-cut brown hair of a man shaped by years of service, but tonight there was no strength in his hands. One arm hung beneath a gray hospital blanket. An old scar curved beneath the collar of his shirt. Beside the stretcher ran Atlas, a large German shepherd with a black and tan coat darkened by rain. His paws slipped once on the smooth floor, but he recovered without slowing. His amber eyes never left Caleb. No one had invited him inside. No one could make him stay outside. The paramedics pushed through the double doors towards surgery, and Atlas followed until a security guard stepped between them. "Sir, the dog cannot go any farther." Atlas stopped. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply leaned to one side, trying to keep Caleb in view as the stretcher disappeared behind a swinging door. Then a nurse lifted a clear medication bag toward the intravenous line. Atlas changed. His ears rose sharply. His body became still. He stared at the hanging bag, drew in one slow breath, and released a low sound from deep in his chest. It was not anger. It was recognition. The guard reached for the loose end of Atlas's leather leash. "Easy, boy." Atlas stepped forward and placed himself between the nurse and the doorway. The movement was calm, deliberate, almost trained. Another guard arrived. Together, they guided him back, but Atlas planted his paws against the floor. His nails scraped across the tile as the operating room doors closed. Once, twice. The sound carried down the hallway like a signal no one understood. "Remove him," the head of security ordered. Atlas was pulled toward the elevators, his wet fur catching the white light, his gaze fixed behind him. A worn collar circled his neck, scarred by weather and years. Beneath it, a small metal tag swung free. A surgeon stepped from the adjoining corridor, reading Caleb's chart as he walked. He was nearly past them when the tag turned in the light. Dr. Nathan Mercer stopped so suddenly that the folder slipped from his hand. His eyes settled on the faded lettering, then on the small crooked cross carved into the buckle. The color left his face. He had seen that collar before, beneath another set of lights, in another place, when sand filled the air and a younger Caleb Rowe had made him promise that no one would leave the dog behind. Nathan raised his voice. "Stop." The guards froze. Atlas looked at him. Nathan stepped closer, barely breathing. "I know that collar." Atlas did not move when Nathan approached. The German shepherd stood between the two guards, rainwater still darkening the fur along his back, his chest rising in slow, measured breaths. Nathan crouched without reaching for him. His eyes remained fixed on the metal tag beneath the worn leather collar. The letters were faint, softened by years of dust, weather, and touch, but he could still read them. Atlas, Canine Unit 17, Caleb Rowe. Beneath the name, almost hidden under a dried streak of blood, were 3 words carved by hand. "Bring him home." Nathan felt the corridor disappear around him. The bright hospital lights became another kind of light, pale and trembling beneath a canvas roof thousands of miles away. He remembered sand in the air. He remembered the steady hum of generators and the sound of a dog refusing every command to step away from a medical cot. Most of all, he remembered Caleb, younger then, exhausted but awake, pressing this same collar into Nathan's hands. The memory lasted only a heartbeat, but it carried the weight of 7 years. "Release him," Nathan said. Daniel Voss, the head of security, kept one hand on the restraint lead. "Doctor," this animal blocked medical staff and resisted removal. He did not attack anyone. He is still an uncontrolled dog inside a surgical wing. Nathan stood. His voice stayed quiet, but something in it made both guards listen. "He is trained, and he belongs to the man behind that door." Daniel glanced toward the operating room. "You know the patient?" Nathan looked again at the tag. "I knew both of them." Atlas washed his face as if searching through the years. Then his nose lifted. He stepped forward once, not toward Nathan, but toward the operating room doors. A muffled alarm sounded inside. A nurse hurried past the glass, followed by an anesthesiologist carrying a second medication tray. Atlas gave a low whine. Nathan turned sharply. Nurse Elena Brooks emerged through the doors, her expression controlled but strained. "Dr. Mercer, the patient is unstable." His heart rhythm changed after the first medication was started. Nathan looked at Atlas. The dog was no longer watching Caleb. His amber eyes were locked on the clear intravenous bag hanging beyond the narrow window. "What medication?" Nathan asked. Elena named it. The answer settled coldly in his chest. "Who confirmed his history?" The emergency record was pulled from the Veterans Network. Allergies were listed as none. Nathan took the chart from her and searched the page. Caleb's name was correct. His date of birth was correct, but the service number beneath it was not. One digit had been reversed. A small error. Quiet. Ordinary. Dangerous. Nathan flipped to the laboratory sheet. The blood type did not match the man he had treated years ago. He remembered because Caleb had needed an uncommon match, and Atlas had remained beside the cot while they searched for it. Nathan handed the chart back. "Stop the infusion. Do not give him anything else until we verify every line." Elena disappeared through the doors. Daniel loosened his grip on the lead, but Atlas did not pull away. He stood perfectly still, listening. Nathan reached carefully toward the collar and turned the tag over. On the back was the same crooked cross he had seen in the desert, scratched into the metal by a Marine who had believed promises should survive even when people did not. Nathan looked toward the operating room, then down at Atlas. "They told me you were gone," he whispered. Atlas blinked once. Behind the glass, the monitor changed its rhythm again. Nathan rose and moved toward the doors. "Keep him here." Daniel hesitated. "Why?" Nathan looked back at the dog who had crossed years of silence to stand outside Caleb Rowe's room. "Because he may be the only one who noticed we have the wrong medical record." 7 years earlier, the desert morning had begun with a silence Caleb Rowe did not trust. The air outside the forward operating base was already warm, carrying the dry scent of dust, fuel, and sun-baked canvas. Caleb stood beside a chain-link enclosure near the training yard, watching a young German shepherd pace along the fence. Atlas was lean then, all long legs, alert ears, and restless amber eyes. He had been removed from the active program after abandoning a formation drill to return to an injured handler. The report called it disobedience. Caleb read it twice and saw something else. The dog had understood that a life mattered more than a line on the ground. Inside the enclosure, Atlas stopped pacing and looked directly at him. There was no fear in the dog's expression, no apology either, only a quiet certainty that Caleb recognized from men who had made hard choices and accepted the cost. Captain Warren Pierce approached with a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. "He is intelligent," the captain said, "but intelligence without discipline becomes a liability." Caleb kept his eyes on Atlas. "What happened to the handler?" "Sprained ankle. Minor heat illness." The dog broke formation before the command was given. Caleb crouched beside the fence. Atlas came closer, nose testing the air between them. Maybe he saw it before anyone else did. The captain gave a tired sigh. "You are not here to rescue every difficult animal, Sergeant Rowe." Caleb rested one hand against the metal links. Atlas pressed his nose to the other side. "No, sir. Just this one." Training began the next morning before sunrise. Caleb did not force Atlas to obey through fear or noise. He learned the dog's rhythm. One tap against his leg meant stay close. 2 fingers lowered meant search. A slow breath meant wait. Atlas, in return, learned the slight change in Caleb's shoulders when danger felt near, the way his jaw tightened when he carried pain, and the silence that came over him before a difficult decision. Within weeks, they moved as if connected by an invisible line. The other Marines noticed. Atlas stopped looking toward the medical station where his former handler had recovered. He began looking toward Caleb instead. Before their first field assignment together, Caleb sat outside his tent beneath a sky crowded with stars. Atlas rested beside him while Caleb turned the dog's new collar in his hands. The leather was plain, strong, and dark brown. Caleb used the tip of a small utility tool to carve 3 words into the back of the metal buckle. "Bring him home." Atlas lifted his head as the final letter was finished. Caleb smiled faintly. "That goes both ways, partner." Months passed. Missions came and went. Atlas found hidden routes, missing equipment, and frightened civilians separated from their families. Caleb never praised him loudly. A hand against the dog's neck was enough. Then, on a pale morning near the edge of a deserted village, Atlas stopped in front of an empty concrete building. The path ahead looked clear. The instruments showed nothing unusual. Still, Atlas refused to move. Caleb studied the dog's rigid posture and the fixed direction of his gaze. Behind them, a young Marine waited for an order. Caleb could have commanded Atlas forward. Instead, he raised one hand and stopped the entire team. "We turn around," he said. Atlas looked back at him once, as if making certain he had understood. 3 seconds later, the ground beneath the building gave a deep, distant shudder, and a cloud of dust rose into the morning sky. The tremor passed beneath their boots like a warning whispered through stone. Dust lifted beyond the abandoned building, rolling upward in a pale wall before the wind began pulling it apart. Caleb kept one hand raised until the last Marine had moved back. Atlas stood beside him, muscles tight, ears forward, watching the empty road as if danger could still change its mind. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the young Marine behind Caleb released a breath he had been holding. "He knew," he said. Caleb lowered his hand and rested it against Atlas's neck. "He always knows something before we do." That day became another quiet mark in the bond between them. But it was not the day Nathan Mercer remembered most. The memory that stayed with him came months later, beneath a white sky washed thin by heat. Caleb and Atlas had been assigned to escort a medical team through a damaged district where several families were waiting for supplies. The route had been checked twice. The streets appeared still. Laundry moved between rooftops. Somewhere behind a wall, a radio played softly enough to sound like a distant prayer. Atlas walked close to Caleb's left side. Halfway down a narrow lane, the dog stopped. Not suddenly. Carefully. His head turned toward a doorway covered by a faded blue curtain. Caleb noticed the change in his breathing. He signaled the team to wait. Atlas stepped forward, then looked back. Caleb followed only far enough to see that a section of the old ceiling inside had begun to sag. A woman and 2 children stood beneath it, unaware. Caleb called to them and guided them outside. Moments after they reached the street, part of the ceiling folded inward with a heavy rush of dust. No one was hurt. The medical team continued, but the delay placed them on a different road for the return trip. It was there, near sunset, that Caleb's vehicle struck a deep washout hidden beneath loose sand. The impact was not violent, but it threw the equipment hard and left Caleb pinned beneath a fallen storage frame. The cabin filled with dust. His left leg would not move. His breathing became shallow. Atlas had been riding in the rear compartment. He forced his way forward through the narrow space and found Caleb in the dimness. "Easy," Caleb whispered. "I am still here." Atlas pressed his nose against Caleb's face, then turned toward the damaged door. He barked once, waited, barked again. The rest of the convoy had moved nearly half a mile ahead before anyone noticed the missing vehicle. Atlas did not stop. He barked in steady intervals, then returned to Caleb each time, placing his body close enough to keep him calm. When the rescue team arrived, Nathan Mercer was with them. He was younger then, newly assigned, carrying more confidence than experience. He climbed inside and found Caleb conscious but fading, one hand buried in Atlas's fur. "We are getting you out," Nathan said. Caleb looked toward the dog. "Him first. He can walk. Then make sure he does." Nathan freed Caleb and moved him onto a medical cot. Atlas followed until another Marine tried to guide him away. The dog refused. Caleb reached for the collar with shaking fingers and removed it. He pressed the worn leather into Nathan's hand. "Do not let them leave him here." Nathan closed his fingers around the buckle. "I promise." Caleb searched his face, making certain the words meant something. Then he nodded. Atlas stood beside the cot, silent now, amber eyes fixed on Caleb as the helicopter approached. The wind flattened the dust around them. Nathan looked down at the collar and saw the 3 carved words for the first time. Bring him home. He believed he had made a simple promise. He did not yet know it would take 7 years to keep it. The helicopter carried Caleb west before nightfall, while Atlas remained behind under the care of another unit. Nathan believed the separation would last only a few hours. Orders changed. Weather delayed transport. Then the records began to move faster than the people inside them. Caleb was transferred from one military hospital to another, first for surgery, then for rehabilitation. Atlas was assigned to a temporary kennel at a different base nearly 400 miles away. Nathan sent 3 requests to reunite them. The first was marked incomplete. The second disappeared after a department transfer. The third returned with a single line that made no sense. Canine deceased following service-related complications. Nathan read it twice. He remembered Atlas standing beside the medical cot, strong, alert, refusing to look away from Caleb. Still, military records carried a cold authority. Once a mistake entered the system, it could harden into truth. Caleb woke days later beneath white sheets and the low hum of machines. His first clear word was not water. It was Atlas. A nurse told him the dog had been transported safely. Another officer later arrived with a folder and a careful expression. He explained that Atlas had not survived complications after the evacuation. Caleb listened without moving. The room seemed to shrink around him. Rain traced the window in thin silver lines, and every sound became distant except the officer's final words. "I am sorry, Sergeant Rowe." Caleb did not cry in front of him. He waited until the room was empty. Then he turned his face toward the wall and placed one hand over the space where Atlas's collar should have been. Across the country, Atlas waited beside a chain-link gate each afternoon. Trucks entered. Boots crossed gravel. Men in uniform passed within feet of him. Every time an engine slowed, Atlas stood. Every time a familiar voice called another dog, his ears lifted. Weeks became months. He completed every command given by new handlers. But something inside him remained anchored elsewhere. He worked without joy. He slept facing the gate. When his service ended, he was moved through 2 training centers and finally to a quiet rescue outside Richmond, Virginia. The staff called him well-behaved but distant. He accepted food. He allowed gentle hands near him. Yet no one could convince him that waiting was over. Caleb returned to Charleston with a cane, a box of medals he never opened, and nights that stretched longer than they should. He learned to walk again. He learned to sleep with the lights on. He did not learn how to forgive himself for surviving without the dog who had saved him. 7 years passed before a winter storm kept Caleb indoors one Sunday afternoon. While searching a veteran's adoption page, he saw a photograph of an older German shepherd sitting beneath a bare oak tree. The dog's muzzle had silvered. One ear carried a small notch near the tip. Around his neck was a plain temporary collar. Caleb almost scrolled past. Then he saw the way the dog held his head, slightly tilted toward the sound of a distant vehicle. Caleb enlarged the image. His hands began to tremble. "Atlas," he whispered. At the rescue center 2 days later, the German shepherd stood at the far end of a fenced yard. Caleb entered alone and stopped 20 feet away. Atlas looked at him but did not move. Time had changed the man's scent. Medicine, scar tissue, winter air. Caleb lowered himself slowly to one knee and held out his hand. "I am sorry I took so long." Atlas took one step, then another. He reached Caleb, breathed against his fingers, and went completely still. A moment later, his front legs folded beneath him. Caleb wrapped both arms around his neck, and for the first time in 7 years, neither of them had to wait. For the first few weeks after the reunion, Caleb and Atlas moved through the days carefully, as if both were afraid the other might disappear again. Atlas slept beside the front door of Caleb's small house outside Charleston, always close enough to hear the change in his breathing. Caleb began walking farther each morning, first to the mailbox, then around the block, then nearly a mile along the marsh road where the air smelled of salt, pine, and wet grass. Atlas matched every step. He never pulled ahead. He never looked back unless Caleb slowed. The old rhythm returned quietly, a hand against the dog's neck, a pause at the curb, 2 fingers lowered when Caleb needed Atlas close. By spring, Caleb was sleeping through most nights. He still woke from dreams he could not fully remember, but now Atlas was there before the room could become a battlefield. One steady breath beside the bed, one warm weight against Caleb's leg, enough to bring him home. The morning everything changed began without warning. Caleb stood in the kitchen pouring coffee when Atlas lifted his head from the rug. His ears turned forward. Caleb rubbed the center of his chest. "It is nothing," he said. Atlas rose. Caleb took 2 steps toward the table, then stopped. The cup slipped from his hand and struck the floor. Coffee spread across the tile. Atlas was beside him before he reached the ground. Caleb remained conscious, but his breathing had become shallow and uneven. Atlas pressed close, then ran to the front door and barked until a neighbor came outside. By the time the ambulance arrived, rain had started falling over the street in thin gray sheets. Caleb tried to tell the paramedics about his medical history, but the words would not come in order. Atlas climbed into the ambulance without permission and refused to leave his side. At St. Gabriel Medical Center, the emergency staff moved quickly. A clerk searched the veterans network while a nurse cut away Caleb's damp shirt and attached the monitors. The system found a record with his full name, date of birth, and service branch. No one noticed that one digit in the identification number was wrong. The mistake followed him from the front desk to the treatment room. It followed him into the medication order. Atlas noticed something before anyone else did. While Caleb lay beneath the white lights, Atlas sniffed the tubing near his arm, then turned toward the clear bag being prepared above him. His body became rigid. He stepped between the nurse and the stand. "Move him back," someone said. Atlas did not growl at the nurse. He stared at the bag. When she reached past him, he blocked her again, calm but unyielding. Security was called. Daniel Voss arrived with 2 guards and saw only a large dog interfering with treatment. Caleb tried to lift his hand. "Atlas knows," he whispered. The words were too weak to stop anyone. Daniel took the loose leash and guided Atlas toward the hall. The dog resisted for the first time since entering the hospital. Not with anger, with purpose. His paws held against the tile while his eyes stayed fixed on the medication. Then Caleb's monitor changed. The first dose had already entered the line. Inside the operating room, the staff prepared to continue using the record in front of them. Outside, Atlas was dragged farther from the door, still turning his head toward Caleb, still trying to say what no one had learned to hear. By the time Nathan Mercer saw the collar and stopped the guards, the wrong chart had already placed Caleb's life on a path measured in minutes. Nathan moved through the operating room doors with the old collar still cold in his hand. The room was bright, quiet, and tense. Caleb lay beneath the surgical lights while the monitors marked each heartbeat in thin green lines. Elena had already stopped the infusion, but the medication had entered his system long enough to disturb the rhythm of his heart. "Verify everything," Nathan said. "Name, identification number, blood type, allergies, prior surgeries. Nothing moves until the record matches the man." The team responded at once. One nurse called the Veterans Records Office. Another pulled Caleb's emergency laboratory results. The anesthesiologist removed the incorrect medication bag and replaced the tubing. Nathan studied the chart again. The name belonged to Caleb Rowe. The history did not. A kidney condition was missing. An old cardiac injury had been assigned to another patient. Even the blood type on the screen was wrong. Outside the doors, Atlas heard the change in every voice. He stood between Daniel and the wall, his body still, his head lifted toward the narrow window. Daniel held the restraint lead loosely now. The certainty he had carried moments earlier was beginning to fade. "How could the dog know?" he asked. Nathan did not look away from the monitor. "He may not know the name of the medication. He knows Caleb. He knows what belongs near him and what does not." Elena returned with a printed laboratory sheet. Confirmed blood type. "The electronic record is incorrect." Nathan read the page, then glanced toward the medication list and the first drug conflicts with his service injury history. The room became silent for half a second. That was all the time Nathan allowed. "We correct it now." The team adjusted the treatment plan. Fluids were changed. A safer medication was prepared. Caleb's heart rhythm remained uneven, then slowed, then steadied for 3 beats before slipping again. Nathan placed one hand near Caleb's shoulder. "Stay with us, Marine." Beyond the glass, Atlas gave a low whine. Not loud, not frightened. It rose and fell with the monitor, as if the dog were listening to the space between the sounds. Daniel looked down at him. For the first time, he did not see an animal refusing an order. He saw a partner waiting for one. Minutes passed. The rain continued against the windows. Inside, Nathan watched the numbers respond. The dangerous rhythm softened. Caleb's blood pressure began to recover. Elena exhaled, but Nathan kept his voice calm. "We are not finished." Another 10 minutes passed before the monitor settled into a steady pattern. Only then did Nathan step away from the table. He removed his gloves and walked into the corridor. Atlas rose immediately. Daniel tightened his hand by instinct, then stopped himself. "Let him go," Nathan said. Daniel looked uncertain. "Hospital policy does not allow him inside." Nathan held up the worn collar. Hospital policy nearly removed the only witness who understood something was wrong. Daniel's face changed. Shame arrived quietly, without defense. He released the lead. Atlas did not run. He walked to Nathan, sniffed the collar, then turned toward the operating room door. Nathan fastened the leather around his neck, careful to place the carved words beneath his throat. "You remembered before I did," he whispered. The doors opened, and Atlas stepped forward only as far as the threshold. He lowered himself to the floor and faced the room where Caleb remained asleep. Nathan stood beside him. Daniel stayed several feet back, holding the unused restraint in both hands. Inside, the monitor continued its steady sound. One beat, then another. Atlas finally rested his head on his paws. He had done all he could. Now he waited for Caleb to find his way back. Caleb did not wake when they moved him from surgery to the recovery wing. The storm had weakened by then, leaving only a soft rain against the windows and the low murmur of water passing through the gutters. Atlas walked beside the bed until the nurses reached the final doorway. There, Nathan stopped and looked at Elena. "Let him stay." She nodded and pulled a chair away from the wall so Atlas could lie near Caleb's hand. The German shepherd settled without command. His body curved beside the bed, close enough to feel every small movement beneath the blanket. Daniel remained in the hallway. He had removed his jacket, but the restraint lead was still looped around one hand. He watched Atlas rest his head on the edge of the mattress, and the sight seemed to make the corridor quieter. Hours passed. The machines kept their patient rhythm. Caleb's breathing remained steady, but his face did not change. Nathan checked the chart again, then stood at the foot of the bed, studying the man he had once treated beneath a canvas roof in another country. Time had changed Caleb. There were more lines around his eyes, more gray near his temples, and a deeper stillness in the way he carried pain even while unconscious. Atlas had changed too. Silver touched his muzzle now. The old collar showed cracks along the edges. Yet the promise between them had not aged at all. Near dawn, Elena entered to check Caleb's vital signs. Atlas lifted his head but did not move away. "He has been like that all night," she whispered. Nathan looked toward the window, where the first pale light was beginning to separate the sky from the rain. "He has waited longer than one night." Caleb's fingers moved. It was so slight that Elena almost missed it. Atlas did not. His ears rose. He stood and placed his chin near Caleb's hand. Nathan stepped closer. "Caleb, can you hear me?" There was no answer. The fingers moved again, searching across the sheet. Not toward Nathan. Not toward Elena. Toward the warmth beside the bed. Atlas leaned forward until Caleb's fingertips touched the fur between his eyes. The room seemed to hold its breath. Caleb's hand rested there, weak but certain. His eyelids opened slowly. For several seconds, he saw only light and shadow. Then his gaze found Atlas. The dog did not bark. His tail touched the floor once. Caleb swallowed, and when he spoke, his voice was barely more than air. "You stayed." Atlas pressed his forehead into Caleb's palm. Nathan looked down and removed his glasses, pretending to clean the lenses. Elena turned toward the monitor, though nothing there needed her attention. Outside the room, Daniel lowered his eyes to the lead in his hand. The leather suddenly looked heavier than before. He stepped inside, stopped near the door, and waited until Caleb noticed him. "Mr. Rowe," Daniel said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Caleb's hand remained on Atlas. "You thought he was dangerous." Daniel nodded. "I thought I was protecting the hospital." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger in his face, only exhaustion and understanding. "Next time," he said, "ask what the dog is trying to protect." Daniel looked at Atlas, then placed the restraint lead on the empty chair. Nathan returned the chart to its holder and reached down to adjust the old collar. The carved words rested beneath Atlas's throat, hidden from view, but no less true. "Bring him home." Caleb closed his eyes again, not from weakness this time, but from peace. Atlas lay down beside him and kept one paw against the bed, as if making certain the distance between them would never grow wide enough to lose each other again. Caleb remained at St. Gabriel Medical Center for 6 more days. Each morning, sunlight entered the recovery room a little earlier, warming the floor where Atlas slept beside the bed. The nurses stopped asking whether the dog should be there. They began bringing a small bowl of water without being told. Elena kept a folded blanket near the window for him. Though Atlas still preferred the hard floor where he could watch Caleb breathe. Nathan visited whenever his schedule allowed. Sometimes he checked the monitors. Sometimes he only stood in the doorway and looked at the two lives he had once believed were lost to distance and bad records. Daniel came on the third afternoon carrying a plain paper bag. Inside was a new leather leash, dark brown and strong, with a small brass plate engraved with Atlas's name. Caleb turned it over in his hands, then looked toward the old restraint lead that Daniel had left behind. "This one is not for pulling him away," Daniel said. "It is for walking him home." Caleb accepted it with a quiet nod. The hospital administration began reviewing what had happened. The mistake in Caleb's record was corrected. New steps were added for verifying the medical histories of veterans transferred through outside systems. Another policy was written for service dogs and trained support animals, requiring staff to identify their role before separating them from a patient. Daniel requested that every security officer attend the first training session. He sat in the front row. 2 weeks later, Caleb returned for a final examination. He arrived in a wheelchair because Nathan had ordered him to conserve his strength, but his color had returned, and his voice no longer sounded as though each word had to climb a hill. Atlas walked beside him, wearing the old collar and the new leash. In the main hallway, several nurses paused to greet them. Atlas accepted each hand with patient dignity, then moved closer to Caleb when the elevator doors opened. Nathan met them near the entrance after the appointment. He carried a small cloth and a bottle of leather conditioner. "I cleaned the collar," he said, "but I left the scratches." Caleb ran his thumb across the worn buckle. "Good. They belong there." Nathan turned the metal plate so the carved words faced upward. "Bring him home." For a moment, none of them spoke. The morning beyond the glass doors was clear after days of rain. Live oaks along the street moved gently in the breeze, and the air carried the clean scent of salt from the harbor. Daniel opened the door for them. Caleb guided the wheelchair forward, then stopped beside him. "You listened," Caleb said. Daniel looked at Atlas. He made it difficult not to. Outside, Atlas slowed his steps to match the turning wheels. Caleb rested one hand against the dog's neck, his fingers settling over the old collar as naturally as if 7 years had never passed between them. Nathan watched from the doorway until they reached the sidewalk. There was no applause, no ceremony, only a veteran moving toward home and a German shepherd walking close enough to make sure he arrived. The carved promise disappeared beneath Caleb's hand, hidden once more against Atlas's fur. But some promises do not need to be seen to remain true. They live in the waiting, in the returning, in the quiet choice to stay beside someone until the road opens again.